What happens when a man who's built walls of wealth meets a woman who's only ever built survival? Grant Whitaker is a billionaire CEO, powerful, polished, untouchable. He trusts no one, especially women who fit the mold of charm and elegance, the kind who smile with empty eyes. But then, on a rainy night, she walks into his office, late, exhausted, and nothing like the world he knows. Hannah Miller is a single mom, a delivery driver who's mastered the art of quiet strength. No time for fairy tales, no use for pity. She's not looking for a savior only enough to get through the week and protect her son. So what made him keep her keychain? Why did he remember her name, and when the world finds out about them, who will stay and who will walk away? This is not just a love story, it's a story about choice, dignity, and what it costs to be seen when you've spent a lifetime feeling invisible. So, before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because this story might just change the way you see people. Now, let's begin. The rain came down like it meant something. Sheets of water battered the glass walls of Whitaker Innovations, a steel and glass monolith in the heart of Boston. Most of the city had shut down early, but the 42nd floor still glowed a lone penthouse office, lit from within like a lighthouse in a sea of darkness. Inside, Grant Whitaker didn't even glance up from his laptop. The storm had been raging for hours, but he'd tuned it out the way he tuned out most things: weather, noise, people. He didn't even notice the first knock at his door. The second came louder, followed by the slow creak of the heavy glass swinging open. Grant finally looked up. She stood there drenched, breathless, holding a crumpled padded envelope to her chest. Water dripped from her jacket, soaking the fine wood floor. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, voice low, almost apologetic. "Delivery for Mr. Whitaker. Requires a signature." Grant blinked, irritated. He didn't appreciate being interrupted, especially not by someone leaving puddles on his reclaimed oak floors. "You're late," he said flatly. "This package was due hours ago." The woman nodded. "Yes, sir. There was an accident on Route 93. Traffic was backed up for miles." Her tone was calm, respectful. No excuses, no theatrics, just facts. "Put it on the table," Grant said, not standing. "Company policy requires a signature," she replied, stepping forward. "Sorry." Grant sighed, set his laptop aside, and stood. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a gray tailored suit. He looked every inch the man who built an empire from code and calculation. He walked around his desk, picked up the stylus, and scribbled something that barely resembled a signature. As he handed the tablet back, he noticed something fall from her jacket pocket, a small, handcrafted keychain. Red yarn wrapped unevenly around a cardboard heart, with childlike handwriting in glitter pen. "You are enough. Mom." The woman reached down quickly, flustered. "Sorry," she murmured, but Grant was already bending down. He picked it up gently. It was soft, almost weightless in his palm, but something about it felt heavy. She met his eyes for the first time. Hers were a soft gray, tired but steady. Not the kind of eyes that begged or flattered, just honest. There was something unsettling in their calm, something that made him forget the storm for a moment. "Here," he said, handing it back. "Thank you," she said, pocketing it quickly. And again, "Sorry for the delay." Without waiting for dismissal, she turned and walked out. Grant watched her go. The glass door swung shut behind her, cutting off the soft sound of wet shoes on polished floor. For the first time in months, he didn't immediately return to work. Instead, he stood by the window, watching as the woman jogged back through the downpour toward an aging delivery van. He saw her fumble with the lock, wipe her face, maybe rain, maybe tears, and slide into the driver's seat. Then she was gone. Grant returned to his desk and sat down slowly. His eyes drifted toward the door, and then against his usual habits back to the space where she'd stood. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But somehow, for reasons he couldn't name, he knew this wouldn't be the last time they crossed paths. And he also knew one thing for certain: that cardboard heart, still lingered in his mind longer than it should have. The windshield wipers groaned as they swept away the rain, barely keeping pace. Inside the old delivery van, the heater coughed but didn't warm. Hannah gripped the steering wheel tightly, her fingers cold and stiff from the storm. She glanced at the time on the dashboard. 6:04 p.m. Too late. The after-school program at Melrose Elementary closed at 6 sharp. Anything after that meant a late fee and judgmental looks from Miss McCaffrey, the program director who never quite smiled. Hannah pressed her foot on the gas, praying silently that traffic would give her a break. It didn't. It never did. By the time she turned onto Crescent Street, her heart was pounding, not just from rushing, but from guilt, the kind that crept in like fog, quiet and suffocating. She parked in the fire lane, grabbed her badge, and jogged toward the school entrance, shoes squelching with each step. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered softly, humming over a nearly empty hallway. Only one child remained. A small boy with sandy blonde hair sat on a wooden bench, hugging a beat-up backpack and a large art folder to his chest. When he saw her, his eyes lit up. "Mom," he called, jumping up. "Eli." Hannah breathed, crouching to hug him. "I'm so sorry, baby." Traffic was... "It's okay," he interrupted, smiling. "Miss McCaffrey said you probably got stuck again. Look." He unzipped the folder and pulled out a paper mosaic. "I made this today. It's our house. I put you in the window so you can see me playing outside." Hannah's throat tightened. The house was crooked, the sky too green, but it was beautiful. "I love it," she whispered. "I'll hang it on the fridge tonight." They walked hand in hand to the van. Eli didn't complain about the damp seat or the lukewarm air. He just hummed softly, swinging his legs, his small presence filling the space like sunlight trying to break through gray. Once they were on the road again, he asked, "Did anyone yell at you today?" Hannah smiled faintly. "A few. That's kind of the job." Eli leaned his head back against the window. "I wish you didn't have to work so much." "Me too." "Honey," she said softly. "But we're okay. We've got each other, right?" He nodded. They drove in silence for a while, until Hannah spotted the cardboard heart lying in the cup holder. She reached out instinctively, but remembered no. That wasn't hers anymore. The memory returned with full weight, the tall man in the immaculate office. Cold eyes, sharpened words. But also, the pause when he picked up the heart. The way he looked at it. The way he looked at her. Just for a second. Like he'd seen something he didn't expect. She shook her head, brushing it away. That wasn't her world. Men like him didn't remember women like her. Delivery drivers were just background noise. Still, as she pulled into the lot of their apartment complex, the image stayed with her. Not just the billionaire, but the moment. That instant when she'd locked eyes with him and felt something shift. She didn't know what it was, and she didn't dare believe it meant anything. Later that night, after Eli was asleep, Hannah sat at the tiny kitchen table with a half-empty mug of tea and a pile of unopened envelopes. Bills, mostly. Past due notices. Rent reminders. She picked one up, scanned the balance, then set it aside. From the bedroom, Eli murmured something in his sleep. A soft whimper. She rose instinctively, tiptoeing into his room and tucking the blanket under his chin. He slept like he lived without fear, trusting the world to be safe because she made it so. Back in the kitchen, Hannah stared at the table. Tomorrow was Thursday. She had a double-shift warehouse pickups in the morning, corporate tower runs in the afternoon. She scribbled a note to herself on a grocery receipt. Milk, bread, gas, hold it together. The storm outside had slowed to a drizzle. Inside, the quiet was heavy. Meanwhile, across town, Grant Whitaker stood in his penthouse kitchen with a glass of bourbon in hand. The office lights were off now, but he hadn't slept. He'd been standing by the window for nearly an hour. The heart, the little handmade keychain, sat on his desk. He should have thrown it away, or returned it. But he hadn't. He'd stared at it instead. "You are enough, Mom." He read aloud, quietly, the words foreign in his voice. He tried to remember the last time something handmade had crossed his path. A decade ago, his late wife used to write notes, back when they were young and didn't own anything worth locking. She'd leave sticky notes on his laptop. "Don't forget to eat. I'm proud of you. You're more than what you build." He'd buried those notes with her, but this new one from a child he didn't know, meant for a woman he'd never met, somehow pried open a door he thought he'd sealed shut. Grant took another sip of bourbon and stared into the night, the storm finally losing its strength. But something inside him had just begun to stir. The morning sun did its best to sneak between the blinds, but Hannah had already been up for over an hour. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the soft shuffle of socks against linoleum. She stirred the last scoop of instant coffee into a chipped mug and looked over at the fridge, where Eli's artwork hung like makeshift wallpaper rocket ships, wild horses, and a sketch of their apartment building with home scribbled in blocky letters across the top. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Eli emerged from the bedroom, hair tousled, blinking in the soft light. "Do we have any cereal left?" "Half a bowl," Hannah said. "You want the milk warm or cold?" "Cold. Feels more like a cold cereal kind of day." Hannah smiled at the seriousness in his tone, as if this were a major life decision. After breakfast, she handed him a neatly folded permission slip for the class field trip. "I signed it last night, but I'll have to ask Miss Callahan if they'll let me pay next week." Eli didn't say anything, just nodded and tucked the paper carefully into his backpack. He never asked for anything twice. Not anymore. By 7:15, they were out the door. Hannah dropped him off at school with a kiss on the forehead and a promise, "I'll be on time today." She'd made the same promise yesterday. The warehouse pickup was late again. Hannah stood near the loading dock of elite couriers, arms crossed, watching as a flustered supervisor tried to reorganize the morning route. The newer drivers stood under the awning, laughing about football and weekend plans. She checked her phone. Time was already slipping. "Hey, Miller," a voice called. "You're assigned to the high-rise loop today. Whitaker Innovations is back on your route." Hannah swallowed hard. "Didn't someone else have that block?" they called out. The supervisor shrugged. "You're the most familiar with that building anyway. Problem no. No problem." She turned back to the van, feeling a weight press against her spine. She'd known it was coming. Still, part of her had hoped she wouldn't see him again, not this soon. Downtown Boston buzzed with its usual rhythm sirens in the distance, horns bleeding through intersections, and the constant drone of construction. Hannah parked in the designated spot near Whitaker Tower and took a moment to breathe. As she reached for the next delivery, her eyes landed on something wedged between her seat and the console. It was the keychain. She'd thought she'd lost it. She picked it up gently. The red yarn was fraying, and the glitter letters were smudged from rain. But it was still whole, still real, still hers. Meanwhile, Grant Whitaker sat in the conference room with a half-dozen board members, all dressed in identical shades of ambition. The topic today was familiar efficiency, expansion, profit. "Frankly," said Marcus Langston, CFO and longtime loyalist, "I don't think we should invest any more in the community tech initiative. It's a feel-good project with no returns. It keeps our name in the press." Someone added, "But there's no quantifiable impact." Grant said nothing at first. He stared at the pie chart on the screen, the lines and numbers that supposedly told a story. Then he leaned forward. "Have any of you ever spent time in the neighborhoods we're trying to reach?" he asked. The room fell silent. Langston blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Grant's voice remained calm. "I said, have any of you actually set foot inside the community centers we're funding, met the kids using our donated laptops, talked to the staff?" No one answered. "Thought so," Grant murmured. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Keep the initiative. Double the budget. And next quarter, we'll measure impact differently by listening." The room scattered in quiet confusion. Back in his office, Grant looked toward the drawer where the keychain now rested. He didn't know why he'd kept it. He told himself it was because he didn't want to throw away something handmade. But the truth was simpler. It reminded him of something he hadn't felt in years' relevance. Not in the business sense, in the human one. That evening, Hannah stood in the checkout line of the grocery store, calculating in her head while Eli clutched a dollar coloring book. The woman ahead of her had a full cart, designer handbag, and no coupons. She didn't even glance at the total before swiping her card. When it was their turn, Hannah placed the items slowly: a gallon of milk, a loaf of bread, one bag of rice, and the coloring book. Your total is $24.78. Hannah nodded, then hesitated. She pulled out her debit card and prayed silently. The machine beeped. Approved. Barely. As they walked out into the cool night air, Eli asked, "Why don't rich people ever have to worry?" Hannah thought for a moment, because most of them never had to learn how. That night, as Eli slept, Hannah sat by the window with a blanket around her shoulders and the keychain in her hand. She wasn't angry at the world, not really. Anger took too much energy, but she was tired of systems that failed people like her, of promises that didn't include folks on the margins, of being invisible until someone needed something. And yet, she wasn't broken. She still woke up early, still delivered packages through rain and snow, still signed field trip slips and kissed scraped knees and made peanut butter sandwiches like they were gourmet meals. Quiet strength didn't make headlines, but it kept the world turning. And tomorrow, like every tomorrow, she'd show up. The elevators in Whitaker Tower opened with a soft chime, spilling quiet music into the marble-floored lobby. Hannah stepped out with the padded envelope tucked under her arm, trying to smooth the dampness from her uniform. It was late afternoon, and her route had run behind again. She hadn't planned to deliver this package herself, but a coworker called in sick, and the replacement driver didn't know the building protocol, so here she was again. She tightened her ponytail, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the security desk. The receptionist barely looked up as she signed in. "Package for Mr. Whitaker," she said. "You can take it up. He's expecting a signature." Hannah swallowed, her throat dry. She wanted to drop the envelope and walk out, but she pressed the elevator button instead. The ride to the 42nd floor was smooth, silent. When the doors opened, the corridor was empty. She stepped into the familiar space, floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek glass walls, white minimalist furniture. It was the kind of place that whispered wealth, not shouted it. She walked to the door of his office and paused. "Knock." "Come in," came the voice, firm, steady, unchanged. She pushed open the door. Grant Whitaker looked up from behind his desk. He wore a dark blue dress shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, tie loosened. A man still perfectly put together, but less like a magazine cover, more like someone who had been working all day. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then he stood. "Miss Miller." "Right." She blinked, startled. "You remember my name?" Grant nodded slowly. "I make it a point not to forget people who stand in my office dripping wet and calm under pressure." Hannah gave a tired smile. "I brought another delivery. Needs your signature." He gestured toward the tablet. As she approached, the silence between them thickened, not hostile, not awkward, just full. He signed the screen, then hesitated. "I believe this is yours," he said, reaching into a drawer. He held out the red keychain. Hannah's breath caught. She hadn't expected to see it again. "I thought I lost it," she said softly, taking it from his hand. "Thank you." Grant studied her. It seemed important. "It is," she said. "My son made it. I figured—" He didn't add anything, just looked at her like he wasn't sure what he was doing next, and that surprised her more than anything. Grant Whitaker wasn't a man used to doubt. "I was harsh," he said finally. "Last time, I realize that now." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "You think that made him smile? A real one?" It didn't quite reach his eyes, but it cracked the armor. "I'm not very good at this," he admitted. "Talking. With people." "I can tell," she said. "You lead with cold and expect people to bow anyway." Grant tilted his head. "And you're not afraid to say exactly what you think. Not anymore." "Why?" "Because I've learned that politeness doesn't pay the rent, or fix broken systems, or raise a child alone." He nodded. "No argument. Just understanding." There was a pause. The kind of pause that meant someone needed to leave before things shifted into something too personal. "I should get back," Hannah said, stepping back. Thanks again. For this. She held up the keychain. As she turned to go, Grant's voice followed her. Does he know? She stopped. Who your son? That he saved something? That he reached someone without ever meeting them? She didn't answer right away. Then he doesn't need to know that. It's enough that I do. With that, she walked out. Grant stood for a long time, staring at the door. The silence returned, but this time, it didn't feel empty. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind Boston's skyline, Hannah pulled into the apartment complex and found Eli waiting on the front steps, legs swinging, a new drawing in his lap. I made this for you, he said as she climbed out of the van. She took it gently. It was a picture of her standing tall, holding a box, with the words, "Mom is strong," written in bold across the top. She hugged him tight. Inside, she pinned it to the fridge beside the others. She didn't tell him about the billionaire, or the office, or the awkward conversation. She just kissed his hair and whispered, "You matter more than you know," and miles away, in a penthouse that felt too quiet for comfort, Grant Whitaker sat with a bourbon untouched beside him, the window reflecting his own image back at him. He wasn't used to being questioned, or corrected, but she had done both, calmly, firmly, without apology. He didn't know why he'd kept the keychain. He only knew that when she looked at him, really looked, he'd felt something crack open. Something he hadn't even realized was still buried. Grant Whitaker stood in front of his office window, his reflection blending with the Boston skyline beyond the glass. It was nearly 8:00 p.m. The lights from neighboring towers shimmered like distant galaxies, cold and untouchable. He tapped his knuckles lightly against the frame. What was he doing? That was the question that had haunted him all day since she walked out with that red keychain in her hand. Hannah Miller. He didn't know much about her, but what he did know had stayed with him longer than any number, deal, or headline. She was tired but not defeated, wary but not bitter. And above all, she was grounded in a kind of quiet integrity he hadn't seen in a long time. He walked back to his desk and opened the bottom drawer. There it was, a slim, dusty black notebook. His wife, Claire, had given it to him years ago, insisting he write something that wasn't tied to profits or projections. Just your thoughts, she'd said, even if they're ugly. Grant flipped through pages of sharp, efficient handwriting notes on grief, on silence, on becoming someone he didn't recognize. He stopped on a blank page and wrote one line. She looked at me like I was still human. Meanwhile, in a modest two-bedroom apartment on the south side, Hannah sat at the kitchen table in a t-shirt and sweatpants, feet tucked under her, a mug of tea growing cold beside her elbow. She was reviewing her delivery schedule for the rest of the week, mentally calculating gas, overtime, and what might be left for groceries. Eli sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting colored pencils. Mom, do you think rich people ever feel scared? Hannah looked up. Why do you ask? Eli shrugged. I don't know. Just seems like they always have everything figured out, like they don't ever worry. She leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. I think everyone worries, baby, just not always about the same things. Eli nodded. Then that man you delivered to yesterday, was he mean again? No, she said softly. He surprised me. Eli looked up. Did he say sorry in his own way? Maybe, she said, but you know what surprised me more? What he remembered my name. Eli grinned. Then maybe he's not a bad guy. Maybe he's just lonely. Hannah blinked, caught off guard. You think he's lonely? Eli gave a small shrug. He looked like he had quiet eyes, like yours when you're tired. The next day, Grant arrived at the office later than usual. He stopped by the receptionist's desk. Brooke, he said to his assistant, who was typing quickly on her tablet. She looked up, startled. Sir, what's the name of the delivery service that handles our legal documents? Elite Couriers, she said. They've been reliable. Find out who delivered the Mitchell package this week. She blinked. You want me to request a specific driver? No. He said too quickly, then corrected. Yes, Hannah Miller. Can you do that quietly? Brooke nodded slowly, hiding her curiosity. Of course. As Grant walked back toward his office, she tilted her head thoughtfully. Hannah Miller. That was new. That same afternoon, Hannah's day was already unraveling. The van had sputtered twice on the freeway, the engine light flashing its usual orange warning. 2 deliveries were delayed, 1 canceled, and to make matters worse, she got a call from the school. Eli had been in a fight, not a fist fight, but words exchanged. A classmate had teased him for the patches on his shoes, said his mom worked for the poor people. Eli had snapped back. He said we didn't belong in this school, Eli had explained later, staring at the floor. He said people like us don't get to go on field trips. Hannah sat beside him, hand on his back. What you said in return wasn't wrong, she murmured. But sometimes the world punishes truth-tellers. Are we poor? Eli asked, voice barely audible. Hannah closed her eyes. We're stretched, but we're rich in better ways. That kid just can't see it yet. Back in her room that night, Hannah opened the small drawer where she kept a few keepsakes baby photos, school drawings, and 1 folded piece of paper, a grocery receipt, with a scribbled quote from an old book she loved. There is dignity in survival. There is poetry in holding on. She didn't believe in fairy tales, not anymore. But something about that man Grant lingered in her thoughts. She didn't trust it, but she couldn't fully ignore it either. Back in his own penthouse, Grant sat on his terrace, bourbon untouched again, watching the city lights shimmer like scattered memories. He thought of Claire, and then, uninvited but not unwelcome, he thought of Hannah's voice, steady, unafraid. He reached for his phone, paused, and typed a note he never sent. I don't know why I want to see you again. Only that I do. He let the screen dim, sat back, and let the silence stretch. Something was shifting. He just didn't know yet if it would hold or fall apart. The corner cafe on Tremont Street wasn't where you'd expect to find a billionaire. It was the kind of place where the furniture didn't match, where the coffee tasted slightly burnt, but the barista remembered your name. Grant Whitaker had driven past it 100 times without noticing. But today, he noticed. Through the rain-speckled windshield of his black town car, he saw her, Hannah. She was seated near the window, hair pulled back, reading something on her phone while her son, Eli, colored quietly across from her. A plastic dinosaur sat beside his cup of chocolate milk like a lunch guest. Grant hadn't planned this. He told himself it was coincidence, a lucky alignment of route and timing, but deep down, he knew better. He took a breath, opened the door, and stepped out. Inside. The bell above the entrance gave a little jingle. Hannah looked up and froze. She recognized him instantly. The polished coat, the stillness in his posture. He didn't belong here. Not really, but for some reason, he was standing in front of her booth like he had every right. Hi, he said simply. Hannah blinked. Mr. Whitaker, Grant. He corrected gently. Mind if I sit? Eli looked up with wide eyes. Mom, that's the man with the big building. Hannah offered a tight smile. I remember. Grant waited until she gave the faintest nod, then slid into the seat across from her. I know this is unexpected, he said, and maybe inappropriate. But I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Hannah folded her arms. For what exactly? For assuming things about you? For treating you like a delivery label instead of a person? She tilted her head. And you came all the way here to say that no. He admitted, I came because I wanted to understand something. Understand what Grant glanced at Eli, then back at her. How you keep showing up. How you carry all that weight. And still manage to smile at your son like the world hasn't crushed you. Hannah stared at him. Eli, unaware of the tension, kept coloring. I'm drawing a dragon that protects small people, he announced proudly. Grant smiled faintly. That's a noble dragon. He has broken wings, Eli added, but he still fights. Hannah looked away, her throat tight. They sat in silence for a moment, just the clink of spoons and the low hum of conversation around them. Finally, Hannah spoke. You don't have to understand me. Grant, I'm not your story to study. I know, he said, but maybe I'd like to listen anyway. She studied him, looking for arrogance, for pity, for any sign that this was just a performance, but he seemed honest, and more than that, unsure of himself, which she suspected was rare. "I don't need your help," she said, voice low. "I didn't come to offer help." "Then why are you here?" Grant exhaled, looking down at the napkin he'd been folding in his hands. "Because something about you made me realize I've been living in a world where nothing surprises me anymore, and then you did." She didn't know what to say to that, but she didn't ask him to leave. They stayed another 10 minutes, talking about the weather, the coffee, Eli's obsession with dragons and cardboard castles. Grant offered to buy Eli a second hot chocolate. Hannah declined. When they finally stood to leave, Grant said, "May I walk you to your van?" Hannah hesitated. "We're just a mother and son trying to finish the week, and I'm just a man trying to start one better." That made her laugh softly, but genuinely. They stepped into the fading light of late afternoon together. As Hannah buckled Eli into the passenger seat, Grant stood to the side, hands in his coat pockets. She turned to him. "This doesn't change anything, I know, but it doesn't have to mean nothing either." He nodded. "I'll take that. And Grant," she added, surprising even herself, "if you really want to understand my life, it won't fit into a coffee meeting. I'm a patient man," he said. "Let's hope so." That night, back in the penthouse, Grant found himself pacing. He didn't drink, didn't work, didn't sleep. He just kept replaying her words. "I'm not your story to study." She was right. And yet, something in him had shifted not because of guilt or charity, but because someone had finally spoken to him like he was a man, not a brand. And for the first time in years, he felt the deep ache of wanting something that couldn't be bought. Across town, Hannah lay awake with Eli curled beside her, one arm flung across her shoulder like a promise. She knew better than to get caught in a fairy tale. Men like Grant didn't cross bridges, they built them for others to walk under. But maybe, just maybe, this one was trying to walk across. And she wasn't sure whether to stop him or to build a step. It arrived folded neatly in an ivory envelope, sealed with a silver-embossed W. Hannah stared at it for a long time before opening it. The paper was heavy, elegant, the kind meant for weddings or gala dinners, not people who ate dinner standing over the kitchen sink. It wasn't a letter, just a formal invitation. Whitaker Innovations, Annual Winter Benefit Saturday, 6:00 p.m. Families welcome, Blackwood Conservatory, Boston. At the bottom, in small handwriting clearly added after printing, was a simple line, "If you come, come as you are." Grant. She hadn't spoken to him since the coffee shop. The moment had lingered in her chest, like a soft echo. But life had pressed in van repairs, Eli's school meeting, and a mountain of bills that refused to wait. The idea of attending something like that benefit felt absurd. "I can't go to something like this," she muttered aloud. Eli, who had crept into the room unseen, tilted his head. "Why not?" Hannah startled. "Because it's not for us." "Says who says? Experience." Eli frowned. "But if they said families are welcome, aren't we a family?" She sighed. "Sweetheart, this kind of event isn't about who's welcome. It's about who already belongs." Eli was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "I think you belong anywhere you show up." She smiled small, sad, and powerful. Saturday came colder than expected. Hannah had nearly talked herself out of it a dozen times. She'd tried on 3 different sweaters before settling on the one with the least frayed collar. Eli wore his only button-up shirt, beaming with pride because he'd ironed it himself. They arrived at the conservatory just before 6. From the outside, it looked like a palace, arched windows, glass domes glowing gold from within. Hannah hesitated at the steps. Her boots squeaked against the polished marble as they entered. Inside, the difference in worlds was palpable. Silk gowns swept the floors. Laughter clinked in champagne glasses. Conversations floated around them like foreign music business, yachts, European winters. Hannah kept a hand on Eli's shoulder. He stood close, wide-eyed, clutching a little sketch pad. No one greeted them. No one offered a smile. They were there, but not included. Until Grant appeared. He approached from the far side of the room, cutting through the crowd like a subtle shift in gravity. He wore a black suit, sharp but simple, and carried no glass, no entourage. When he reached them, his face softened. "You came," he said. "You invited me," Hannah replied. Grant looked down at Eli, and this must be the artist behind the keychain. Eli grinned. "And the dragon drawings. I'd like to see those sometime," Grant said. "You can—" "I brought my sketch pad." Grant knelt to Eli's level. "Will you show me later?" Eli nodded eagerly. A few heads turned. A few eyebrows lifted. But Grant didn't notice or didn't care. They moved toward the refreshments table together, but as they passed a group of finely dressed guests, one woman, tall, red-lipped, and icy, let her voice carry just enough did Whitaker seriously invite his delivery girl. The words were a dagger wrapped in silk. Hannah froze. Grant stopped too. He turned, calm but direct. "Excuse me." The woman offered a smile as sharp as broken glass. "Oh, nothing. Just wondering how far corporate generosity stretches these days." Hannah felt the room tilt, embarrassment rising like heat. But Grant didn't flinch. "She's here because she deserves to be," he said. "More than most of us." The woman scoffed, raising a glass as if to say, "Whatever helps you sleep at night." Hannah tugged Eli gently toward the far corner of the room. They sat near a small indoor fountain, away from the spotlight. Eli dipped his fingers into the water, then opened his sketch pad to draw the koi fish. Hannah sat silently beside him. "I shouldn't have come," she said quietly. "You didn't do anything wrong," Grant replied, appearing beside her with 2 cups of cider. She looked up. "You didn't have to say anything back there. I didn't do it for you." That surprised her. "I did it because I'm tired of watching people pretend like decency is a luxury." She looked at him, really looked, and saw at the weariness behind his eyes, the years of climbing ladders that led to lonely roofs. "You're changing," she said. "Maybe," he admitted, "or maybe I'm finally seeing." Later, as the evening wound down, Eli fell asleep with his head on Hannah's lap. The music softened. The crowd thinned. Grant lingered. "Thank you for coming," he said. She looked down at her son, then back at Grant. "He'll remember this. For better or worse, hopefully better. I'm not sure I can keep showing up in rooms like this." Grant hesitated. Then maybe it's time someone built better rooms. That night, as they walked back to the van under a sky dusted with stars, Hannah took Grant's invitation, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her coat pocket. Not because she believed in fairy tales, but because, for once, the door had opened, and she'd walked through it without apologizing. That mattered. Even if nothing came of it, that mattered. The winter benefit faded into memory like a dream you half remember, beautiful in fragments, uncomfortable in others. For Hannah, it stayed with her longer than she wanted. She kept replaying the moment the woman sneered, the way the crowd looked through her, like she wasn't there. She thought of Eli, head resting on her lap, oblivious to the undercurrents in that room, and of Grant, how he'd stood there, unflinching, defending her without fanfare. He didn't owe her that, but he'd done it anyway, and it had rattled something loose. A few days later, Hannah was reorganizing a stack of delivery slips when her supervisor waved her down. "You've got to pick up residential, not corporate." She raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual for this route." The supervisor shrugged. "Client requested you specifically." Hannah knew before she checked the address. Grant stood waiting outside his townhouse, not the penthouse office, not some glass tower, but a quiet brick building in a historic district, tucked behind bare trees and iron fences. He wore no jacket. Despite the cold, his hands were buried in his pockets. When Hannah stepped out of the van, he smiled, but not the kind of smile meant to impress, just a soft acknowledgement. A hello. "You requested a delivery," she asked, arms crossed. "I did," he replied. "Technically. What's the package?" He held up a brown bag. "Lunch. I thought you might not have had any yet." She blinked. "You ordered food, so I'd bring it to you. I hoped you might stay and eat it." She looked at the townhouse, then back at him. This is highly irregular. I'm a very irregular man. That pulled a reluctant laugh from her. She studied his face for a long moment. Then she said, 10 minutes. The townhouse was surprisingly simple inside. Hardwood floors, shelves filled with books, not awards, a fireplace that looked used. Family photos, not just Claire, but a much younger Grant with scruffy hair and a goofy grin. Hannah sat stiffly at the small kitchen table while he unpacked 2 sandwiches and 2 cups of clam chowder. You cook? She asked. Used to? Claire did most of it. You said she passed. He nodded. 4 years ago, cancer. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was respectful. I'm sorry, Hannah said. So was I. He replied. They ate quietly for a few minutes. The soup was good. The bread was warm. Outside, snow had begun to fall, lightly tapping against the window pane. You don't seem like the type to chase people, she said at last. I'm not. So why me? Grant looked down at his soup. Because you make things harder to ignore. Like what my own privilege, my silence. The way I've coasted for years thinking I was decent just because I wasn't cruel. You think showing up makes you decent? No. But I think listening might be a start. Hannah leaned back in her chair. You know, when I was in that ballroom, I felt like I was trying to breathe through a straw. Every step felt like someone waiting to laugh. I noticed. You didn't flinch. I wanted to. Then why didn't you? Grant paused. Because if you could stand there uninvited, outnumbered, carrying the weight of your life on your shoulders and not flinch, then what excuse did I have? That silence again, heavy but healing. As they stood to leave, Grant followed her to the door. I know I can't buy your trust, he said. I wouldn't insult you by trying. But I'd like to earn a little of your time. No strings, no pity, no rescue fantasy. None. She gave a small nod. We'll see. He watched as she stepped outside, her boots crunching softly on the new snow. Before she reached the van, she turned back. Grant. Yes, you surprised me again. That evening, Hannah curled up on the couch with Eli, who was reading aloud from his favorite dragon book. Do you think dragons ever get tired of fighting? He asked, mid-sentence. I think the good ones don't fight unless they have to, Hannah said. Why? Because they know fire can burn the wrong people. Eli considered this, then nodded. I think you're a dragon, he said. Matter of fact. Hannah kissed his forehead. Then I hope I grow wings that heal instead. And in his own quiet home, Grant stood at his bookshelf, finger trailing across the spines. He didn't know what was coming next. Didn't know if he was capable of what this new direction might demand. But for the first time in years, he wanted to learn, not how to lead, but how to follow a quieter kind of truth. It had been a week since the lunch in Grant's townhouse. Since then, he hadn't texted, hadn't called, hadn't made any grand gestures, or shown up at her doorstep with flowers. And somehow, that unsettled Hannah more than if he had, because silence left room for thought. And thought, when you've lived too long in survival mode, becomes a battlefield. On Wednesday night, after Eli had fallen asleep with his face buried in a pillow fort, Hannah stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing out her damp hair. She stared at herself, not in a self-critical way, but almost like she was looking at someone she used to know, someone softer, someone who believed in things like second chances. She dried her hands on a towel and walked quietly to the kitchen. The apartment was dim, lit only by the glow of the streetlight slipping in through the blinds. She poured a small cup of tea, not because she was cold, but because she needed something to hold. In her mind, she heard his voice again. Listening might be a start. If you could stand there and not flinch, then what excuse did I have? She closed her eyes. Why him? Why now? What scared her more that he might walk away, or that he might stay across town? Grant sat on his terrace, wrapped in a thick sweater, a closed book resting on his knee. He hadn't been able to concentrate for days. He wasn't sure if she was waiting for him to reach out, or if silence was her answer. He didn't want to cross a boundary she hadn't invited him past. But still, he kept hoping, not for romance, Not yet. Maybe never. Just for the chance to keep talking to her, to know what she thought when she wasn't guarding herself, to understand what made her laugh or cry, to be seen by someone who wasn't impressed, wasn't dazzled, wasn't trying to get anything out of him. He picked up his phone, typed, "If I asked to see you again, would that feel like pressure or permission?" He didn't send it. Instead, he pressed save as draft and left it there. The next day, Hannah found herself rerouted to a residential drop-off in Cambridge. As she pulled into the driveway of a small independent art school, her brow furrowed. She didn't normally deliver here. Inside, the receptionist greeted her warmly and handed her a padded envelope. "Your son's application materials were received," she said. The director was quite impressed with his sketches, especially the Dragon series. Hannah blinked. "Wait, what application?" The woman smiled. "The scholarship one. We were told to expect you today." A name was on the donor line, Whitaker Family Fund. That night, Hannah sat on the front steps of her apartment building with her coat wrapped tightly around her. She hadn't told Eli, not yet, because this wasn't about him. Not entirely. It was about her, about what it meant to let someone care, and whether she could allow it without feeling like she owed them something in return. When Grant called the next morning, she didn't answer, but she called him back that evening. "Was that you?" she asked. No greeting, no preamble. He didn't pretend not to understand. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I believe in him. And what about me?" He was quiet. "Then I believe in you too, but I don't want to push." "You're already pushing," she said. "Even your silence pushes." He exhaled. "Then tell me what not to do. Don't assume I need fixing. I don't. Don't try to rescue me. I won't. Don't love my son like he's your redemption story." That hit him hard, but he didn't flinch. "I'd love him," Grant said, "because he's worth loving." Hannah leaned against the wall, one hand pressed to her forehead. "This scares me," she whispered. "Me too. You could walk away any second. So could you." "But I won't," she said, before she realized it. And that, more than anything, was the scariest truth of all. Later that night, after Eli had gone to bed and the apartment was still, Hannah pulled the art school packet from her bag and laid it on the table. She traced her finger over the words, "recommended for full scholarship consideration." She hadn't dreamed for herself in years, but this was a dream she could let live, even if it came from someone else's kindness, even if she didn't quite trust it yet. And somewhere across the city, Grant finally opened the draft message on his phone, read it, smiled faintly, and deleted it. He didn't need to ask anymore. She'd already answered. The invitation hadn't come with fanfare. No handwritten notes, no chauffeured car, just a quiet text from Hannah Dinner. "If you're still curious, 7 p.m., you bring dessert." Grant had stared at the message longer than necessary. Not because he didn't want to go, he did, but because it felt like something bigger than a meal. It felt like permission. When he arrived, he knocked softly. The door opened to the smell of something warm and familiar: pasta, garlic, maybe a hint of basil. Hannah stood there in a navy blue sweater and jeans, hair in a loose braid. She looked tired, yes, but comfortable, unarmed. Eli was already at the table, setting out mismatched forks like it was the final touch to a royal feast. "You brought dessert?" he asked eagerly. Grant held up a bakery box. "Chocolate pie. Thought we could break some rules before bedtime." Eli's eyes widened. "You're officially invited forever." Hannah chuckled. "Don't say that too loud. He might believe you." "I already do," Grant said. Dinner was simple penny pasta, roasted carrots, warm bread, and yet it tasted better than anything Grant had eaten in months. He sat across from Eli, who talked nonstop about dragons and space missions and how he once tried to build a time machine from cereal boxes. Hannah listened with a quiet fondness, smiling softly when Eli interrupted himself to offer Grant a slice of bread. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't impressive, but it was real, and that made it rare. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Eli settled on the floor with his sketch pad while Hannah and Grant sat on the small couch, mugs of tea in hand. The room was dim, but cozy, cluttered in a lived-in way, with blankets draped over the armchair and family photos tucked into bookshelf corners. Hannah stared at the steam rising from her cup. "You know," she said slowly, "I don't usually invite people in. I don't usually get invited." He replied. She looked at him, eyes searching. "Why do you think that is?" He considered, "Because I stopped being someone people needed, and I forgot how to be someone they simply wanted." She nodded, then looked away. "What about you?" he asked. "Why don't you let people close I used to?" she said. "Once." Grant waited. Patient. "I was engaged." She finally admitted, "Eli's father. We were young, dumb, thought we had time. Then I got pregnant, and everything changed. He wanted me to end it. I didn't. He left. He disappeared." A pause. No contact. She shook her head. Not even a postcard. Grant swallowed. That must have been... "It was lonely," she said. And then it got exhausting. And then it just became life. Eli had dozed off mid-sketch, pencil still in hand, paper drifting toward the carpet. Grant glanced at him. "He's remarkable. He's everything," Hannah said. "You're raising him to be braver than most men I know." She gave a small smile. "I just want him to know he matters, even when life tries to say otherwise." Grant looked down at his hands. "Claire used to say that too. Your wife." He nodded. "She was quieter than me, but stronger. She believed people deserved to be heard." "How long were you married?" 16 years. We met in college. She made me laugh before I learned how to take myself seriously." Hannah studied him. "You miss her?" she said. "I do," he admitted. "But what I miss more is who I was when she believed in me." That landed somewhere deep between them. After a long pause, Hannah said softly, "People think being alone is what breaks you, but it's not." Grant asked, "No, it's when you start believing you deserve it." Grant stared at her, and in that moment, without theatrics or fanfare, something shifted. Not a declaration, not a kiss, just understanding. As he stood to leave, Hannah walked him to the door. The hallway light flickered softly. "Thank you," she said. "For dinner, for not pretending." He nodded. "You don't need pretending. You need someone who knows how to sit in the silence. You're getting better at that. I'm learning from the best." He reached for the door, then paused. "If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you don't have to ask nicely." She gave a tired laugh. "You're lucky. I don't ask nicely anyway." They shared a look, one filled with more honesty than comfort, and then he left, back inside. Hannah leaned against the door, eyes closed. She didn't know where this was going, but for the first time, she didn't feel like she was the only one carrying the weight of it. And that felt like something she might one day trust. The story broke on a Thursday morning. It started as a whisper on a finance blog, barely a blip, but by noon, the headline had gone viral. Billionaire Whitaker. Seen cozying up to mystery woman, not from the country club, but from the courier van. There was a grainy photo, Grant and Hannah, walking out of the art school, Eli between them, holding both their hands. To the casual viewer, it was sweet. To the media, it was scandal. Hannah's phone buzzed relentlessly, text messages, missed calls, even a few reporters who somehow found her number. A local tabloid left a voicemail offering a platform to tell her side. Her stomach twisted. By the time she got to work, the warehouse was buzzing. A few coworkers gave her sidelong glances. One of the drivers smirked. "Didn't know you were aiming for the Forbes list, Miller." She didn't respond, but inside, she was unraveling. By lunchtime, her supervisor pulled her aside. "This is delicate," he said. "We've got corporate clients calling, asking questions." "About what?" "About whether you're using your job to gain access." Her eyes narrowed. "Is that a joke? I'm just telling you what's being said." Hannah swallowed hard. "So what? Because I know someone with money, I'm a threat now." "Take the day off," he said gently. "Let it cool down." When she picked Eli up from school, he was unusually quiet. In the car, he finally asked, "Are you famous now?" "No, she said, forcing calm. Just noticed. Kids were talking. One said, I'm going to get rich now. What did you say? I said, you're the richest person I know already. Her throat tightened. She blinked hard and reached for his hand. That evening, she turned off her phone, dimmed the lights, pulled the curtains closed like the outside world might get in through the cracks. She didn't tell Grant. She couldn't. Because what would she say? That his world, the one he had invited her into, had just tried to chew her up, or that hers wasn't built to survive in his spotlight? Grant found out anyway. Brooke, his assistant, entered his office with her usual clipboard and a worried frown. You've seen this. She set her phone in front of him. He didn't even have to click the article. The photo said enough. His jaw tightened. How bad, publicly not catastrophic. Privately, some of the board is getting nervous. Investors are asking for meetings. And from what I gather, she's not answering. Grant leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling like it might hold the answers. He wasn't ashamed, but he was furious at the world, at the system, at himself, because he'd let her walk into this storm alone. That night, Grant stood outside Hannah's building for nearly 20 minutes. He didn't buzz, didn't call, just stood there, coat collar turned up against the wind. Eventually, the front door opened. She stepped out slowly, arms crossed, face unreadable. Hi, he said. Don't. I needed to. I said don't. They stood in silence. I never meant for this, he said finally. I know, she replied, but it happened anyway. Let me help. That's the problem, she said, voice breaking. You help, and then I owe. You show up, and then I'm the project. You care. And suddenly I'm not just a woman, I'm a headline. I never saw you that way. But the world does, she snapped. And I can't protect Eli from that. I can try. You don't get to try, she said, not when trying puts us in the crosshairs. Grant looked down. So, this is it. Hannah exhaled. This is me choosing my son over a maybe. He nodded, slowly, painfully, then turned and walked back to his car. She didn't watch him go. She didn't have to. The ache in her chest told her everything. Later that night, Eli crept into her bed. Mom, yeah, are we in trouble? No, she said, wrapping her arms around him. We're just in the quiet between what she swallowed, between falling apart and finding a new way forward. And in his empty townhouse, Grant stood at the window, looking out at nothing. He'd spent years building things that couldn't feel. Now he missed something he couldn't replace. Not status, not safety. Just her voice saying, don't pretend. And she hadn't. Not once. Maybe that's what made losing her feel like the most honest pain of all. The first snow after the storm came quietly. No headlines, no cameras. Just soft white flakes dusting the rooftops and coating the streets in a blanket of hush. Hannah stood at the window, cradling a mug of tea between her palms. Eli was still asleep, curled in a tangle of blankets on the couch. He'd insisted on staying close to her for the past few nights, just in case the world got loud again. It hadn't. Not yet. But she didn't trust silence the way she used to. Not anymore. She hadn't seen Grant in 12 days. She told herself it was for the best. That distance gave room to breathe, to protect, to forget the possibility of something too fragile to survive the weight of exposure. But when she opened the door that morning to retrieve the mail, she found something resting on the doormat. A box. No label. Just her name written in neat, familiar handwriting. She hesitated, then brought it inside. Inside the box, nestled beneath a layer of tissue paper, was a single item, a sketchbook, hand-bound, leather cover, high-quality paper. Inside the front cover, a note for Eli. Because sometimes the world sees better through the eyes of those who still believe in dragons. Grant. Taped beneath the message was a second, smaller note. This one for her. I don't expect a call. I don't expect forgiveness. But if you ever need someone to stand beside you when the world gets loud again, I will. Hannah stared at the words for a long time, then folded the note, placed it back in the sketchbook, and set it gently on the table beside Eli's crayons. That evening, she didn't text. She didn't call. She showed up. Grant opened his front door to the soft knock of a hand he'd memorized in silence, and there she stood, no umbrella, no apology, no pretense, just her, windblown and tired and braver than he could ever be. He opened the door wider, but didn't say a word. She stepped inside. "I didn't come to say thank you," she said, removing her coat, or to explain. "Okay," he said. "I didn't come to make anything easy. I don't want easy." He replied. "I came," she said slowly, "because I realized something." "What's that?" "I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of mattering to someone who might disappear." Grant nodded, understanding deeper than she could know. "And I'm afraid of becoming someone you regret letting in," he said. "Then maybe," she whispered, "we can be afraid together." They stood there in the quiet for a long time. No kissing, no swelling music, just the sound of two people who had run out of excuses finally standing still. Later, they sat on the floor with a pizza box between them, knees touching, watching Eli sketch something new. "A castle," he explained, "but not the kind that keeps people out. It's got open doors and a garden inside." Grant leaned forward. "Who lives there?" Eli didn't hesitate. "People who stopped running." Hannah looked at Grant. He looked back. Neither of them said a word, because some truths didn't need to be spoken, only stayed with. Months later, in a corner of the conservatory garden, a new community art program quietly opened. There were no ribbon cuttings, no press, but the room was filled with blank pages, open hands, and children learning to draw not just dragons, but the courage to stay. And in the back of the room, a woman with tired eyes and a quiet smile watched her son help another child blend colors. Beside her, a man who'd once built empires in silence now found purpose in listening. Together, they stood not in triumph, but in choice. The quiet, daily, radical choice. To stay. Sometimes, the most powerful kind of love isn't loud. It's not wrapped in perfection or tied to status. It's in the quiet gestures, the small choices, the decision to stay when it would be easier to walk away. Grant and Hannah's story isn't just about two people from different worlds. It's about what happens when we dare to see each other beyond titles, beyond uniforms, beyond headlines. But not everyone welcomed their story, because in a world too quick to judge and too slow to understand, compassion becomes a radical act, and kindness, a quiet rebellion, to anyone who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told they didn't belong. You matter. You always have. And to those who found the courage to see beauty in places others ignore. Thank you. Because stories like this, they don't just heal. They remind us who we're capable of becoming. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, please like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Your support helps us bring more voices to light, more stories that matter. And remember, the next story may be even closer to your heart than you expect. We'll see you in the next one.